come on board in that position as the director of marketing. And I didn't know a thing about software development. I had been recruited because my company had been using my new company's software for a reservation system. And we had just gone through an upgrade of our systems. And during that upgrade period, I had been invited by my new company, Hotel Information Systems, to be part of their think tank group. And when we got done with the think tank stuff, and then when we implemented our new system for my organization, they came to me and basically said, hey, are you looking to do something different? Would you like to be a part of this? So on and so forth. And I had kind of flattened out in my role at my current company. And I went and explored it, and literally I got the call on a Friday that they wanted to know if I was interested. I met with the VP of marketing on Monday. And literally by Monday afternoon, I gave my notice. Now, you may be questioning, well, what does that have to do with coaching? Well, that was also the very first time that I got exposed to coaching. Unbeknownst to me, one of the things that didn't come up in the interview process was we were going through a merger. We were actually acquiring two other companies, and that's the reason that I was brought on board, was to help manage and guide all of this activity. Well, one of my first assignments was to obviously look at all the products, determine which products we were going to keep, which products were not going to go further in development. I was also part of the team that was deciding which employees would be kept, so on and so forth. And ironically, my boss and I, so the VP of marketing and I, were charged with working with the executive team to try to manage what I lovingly call the egos in the room. And we ended up hiring an executive coach to help guide us through this process. And I remember sitting in the conference room that very first day, watching her with all these VPs and presidents of companies, because they were all represented, all of them knowing that in the next couple of months, some of them were not going to be sitting in that room any longer. Some already knew that for sure. Others were on the fence. They didn't know if they were being kept or not being kept. And as I watched her powerfully ask questions and, be the person who was inviting the deeper conversations to happen, I thought, gosh, I'd love to be doing that. Well, roll forward 10 years later, it's now 2006. I had already been laid off from that company years ago in 2000. I had taken a year to find my next job. And then I had worked for a .com where I, again, did marketing and branding, but I also did bring in a couple of coaches into that workplace. And then I got laid off there. And so here I stand, 2006, I'm done. I'm over building other people's businesses. The latest one with the .com, I'd taken them from zero in revenues, and we were at about $3.5–4 million in revenue in less than 3 years. And so we were moving on. We were about to crest into the $5 million, $6 million range, and I got laid off. And that's when I said, I'm done. I am really done doing this. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to figure it out. And the most logical place for me to go was to become a branding and marketing consultant at that time. It was also at the time that social media was just beginning to come on the scene. It was that thing that everybody was talking about. What do we do? Why do we need Twitter? Why should we think about Facebook? All this stuff was happening. And I decided, because of my marketing and branding background, hey, I'm going to go get certified as a social media professional. So I went through a year-long program on that. And then it was also at the time that I started seeing a lot of people starting to position themselves as marketing coaches, branding coaches, social media coaches. And so that's what I began to do. I marketed myself as a marketing coach. Even though I was doing consulting, there was some coaching that was happening. And before I knew it, I had a lot of people in my practice who were coaches. They were coaches who were either just launching businesses, coaches launching books, coaches trying to figure out what their message was. And as I began to work with each of those people, most of them said, you're so much more of a coach than you are a consultant. And that's what we love about you. You ask us the deeper questions. You help us dive deeper into where we are. Well, I kept hearing this. So here we go, back to 1996. I see the coach. I bring her in. I'm like, this is interesting. Then about 1999 through 2000, when I got laid off from that job, ironically enough, Coach Training Institute showed up on my radar. I thought about going through a program at that point in time, but here I am, I'm laid off. Yeah, I had a golden parachute, but I was also going through a divorce. I was also coming out of the closet. So it's like coaching kept showing up in my world, and then I'd like, yeah, it's not time. Well, suddenly in 2008, in the beginning of 2009, I realized it was time for coaching to be something I needed to look at. The real reason behind it wasn't because of my marketing and branding stuff. Even though that was something I was doing, I was very successful at it. It was also something I wasn't enjoying. But what was pushing the button to move forward was I was suddenly surrounded by a lot of other people, mostly men, who were coming out late in life, who had been married, who had kids. And a lot of these guys were asking me for advice. Now, as a coach, I know that sometimes we give advice based on what we do or what we've done or what we've seen other clients do. But what I started feeling really frustrated about in myself was, well, I'm giving these guys advice, but I don't know if that's the best thing to be doing for them. So I actually started exploring going back to school to get my master's in counseling and marriage and family therapy. But the more I looked at that, I thought, I don't want to do this. That's a 3-year gig of getting ready and then, dealing with legal stuff and all that. It didn't feel right. And one thing I've learned through my own coaching journey and my journey of discovery in myself is I have a beautiful sense of intuition, and I need to learn to listen to that intuition. And that's what ended up guiding me towards becoming a coach. And I remember walking into the first weekend training with IPEC. And as we all know, one of the very first questions that we all get asked is, what do you want to do? What kind of coaching do you want to be doing? What kind of coach do you want to be? Who do you want to work with? And as we went around the room and that question got to me, I stood up and I said, I'm the coming out coach, and I help people come out to live their truth in their sexual orientation and their gender identity. That was the very first time I said those words. But in that moment, I felt this was my truth, and this is what I was meant to do. So I'm going to stop here for a minute, Claire, and see if there's any questions that anybody has at this time before I keep moving on and talking about what I'm doing.
I don't see any Q&A. Does anybody have any questions? I just want to say it was really nice the way you described that you had a beautiful sense of intuition. And it's interesting, when you and I were in the same ELI course in New Jersey.
Right.
You were I saw you as the coming out coach. So
right.
You had assumed that identity by that time, and that's the way that I observed you. You were quite prominent within the whole organization, the whole coaching crew there. There were like hundreds of people there, and I remember you. So that's pretty powerful.
Well, that's amazing. and you're right. By that point, I had really began to embrace and own this piece. And it's amazing to me, and we're going to talk about where I've gotten off track and stuff throughout the years, but it's amazing to me when you stay centered. That doesn't mean you always are going to do exactly the same thing, but when you stay aligned with your core and the thing that you're meant to be doing, Oprah talks a lot about when you align with what you're put on this earth to do, it becomes easy. And I would have to agree with that at this point. I didn't always agree with that because I was a lot of times searching, trying to find my ways to things. And the more that I always come back to center, the more that I align with what I want to be doing and how I want to be doing things in my practice, the easier it is, the more successful I am, and the less stress that I have. So as things continued to move forward, I did become known as the coming out coach. I had a lot of rapid early on success. In my first year of doing the coaching, I ended up on national TV. I was on the second generation of the Ricky Lake Show. She brought me on right around National Coming Out Day to be the guest expert on the show. I landed several radio show appearances. I started writing for Huffington Post and another blog called yourtango.com, which those events led me to now writing for Good Men Project and Yahoo Shine and some of the national LGBT magazines I write for on occasion. So if somebody had said to me in 1999, when I came out of the closet, when I went through the painful yet freeing journey of stepping into my truth as a gay man and going through a divorce and hurting a woman that I cared deeply about and watching my children become one of the statistics of being kids of a divorced family, if somebody had told me that all these years later, basically 17 years later, that I would be talking in front of a group of coaches about what I've done, having a nationally syndicated podcast, having been on national TV, if anybody had told me all this stuff, I would have said, you're absolutely crazy. That's not the path I'm going to be on. Mm-hmm. But now that I'm here and that I embrace that this is the work I'm meant to be doing, I feel very settled. I feel very centered. And some of that centering came from going off track a lot. Mm. Now, for most people, looking in from the outside, and probably Claire, I think you kind of said it to some degree just from the observation of me at the ELI training we both did. A lot of people looking from the outside in were like, wow, this guy's really got it going on. Look at what he's building, da, 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 da. But there's always some sort of dirty little secrets that hide out in the corners of our closets. And my dirty little secret was I wasn't making any money. Not because there wasn't money out there to be made as the coming out coach, but there was a flaw in my revenue model. And I didn't see it until I actually was trying to make this business work. And the flaw was this. If you are a married individual who is struggling with your sexuality, you find someone like me, you read my website, you're like, oh, wow, this guy could probably really, really help me. Mm-hmm. The challenge was, how are you going to pay me? For most married couples, a lot of married couples anyway, your finances are all intermingled. And if you happen to be a husband whose wife is managing the finances, or a husband whose wife is deeply involved in the finances, how are you going to explain where this $400, $500, $600 a month is going? Now it's a really big stumbling block for my business. It caused me to have to have the coming out coach brand, but then caused me to go create another brand called Life Coach Rick. It caused me to go create another brand to help survive called the Gay Man's Life Coach, all of which were really great, but there was still a flaw that if you're coming to work with me and somehow your spouse goes and Googles me, even if you're paying the bill to Life Coach Rick, there was so much out there about me at that point in time. Any Google search, you could find videos that I was doing about coming out. You could see the Ricky Lake stuff that was out there. You were finding articles about me. The thing is, it was very easy for a spouse to probably connect the dots. Mm-hmm. So we went through a lot of really tough times to where I finally kind of made the coming out stuff a little less prominent and really focused on the Gay Man's Life Coach. And then I even made that a little less prominent and just focused on being Life Coach Rick and talking about I help people come out to live their truth. Mm. And in that moment, and I say moment, it wasn't a moment, it was many months. What I started to learn was, wait, even though I'm very niche and I'm very targeted on who I want to work with, what started happening, ironically, is I started having a lot of other people show up in my practice, mostly heterosexual women, who were telling me, if you can help someone come out of the closet to live their truth as a gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender person, you can probably help me take a stand to be who I am. And that was the moment that I think many of us coaches get to where we ask ourselves the question, how am I going to scale this business? How am I going to grow this business in different ways, yet staying very focused on what I do? And that was the first insight I had to, I've got a bigger message here than just I'm the coming out coach who helps people come out of the closet to live their sexual truth.
Right.
And that's when I really felt the calling, Claire. It was the calling to, you know what? Let's take a look at this. Let's figure out what that bigger picture really begins to look like. And it was one place that I began to stumble again, because I got all excited. I thought, okay, now I can go create this huge, magnanimous, wonderful thing about being authentic and being you. And at the time, authenticity was being talked about in every breath of anybody who was speaking. I mean, we were getting to the place where authenticity was just like so overwhelming that I was just another voice in all that chatter that was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to get really lost, because I started chasing, I think a lot of people, especially a lot of coaches, have heard, chasing the bright, shiny objects. So I was running over here and I was trying to do this with women. And then I was running over here, trying to do this with gay men. And then I was trying to do this with my coming out team. And, there was just lots of, okay, I'm doing whatever it takes to try to generate revenue. And then I had a real coming out journey again in my own self. I said, you know what? Stop trying to do everything. What is it you want to be doing? Who is it you want to be serving? And the minute I asked that question, who is it I want to be serving? It also flipped the switch of, am I trying to be something, or am I trying to be of service? And that was one of the biggest moments in my life, is when I answered the question, I just want to be of service. Now, it doesn't mean I didn't want to make money. It didn't mean I didn't want to be on podcasts. It didn't mean any of this stuff. But when I answered that question, that I really want to be of service and I want to help people be fully self-expressed. And the moment I uttered those words, fully self-expressed, which came from some training I was doing at the time with Michael Port, who his book is Book Yourself Solid. Mm-hmm. I was doing some group training through his group program, and one of his coaches said to me, I think what you're really good at, Rick, is helping people step into being fully self-expressed. That was kind of the light bulb moment of, okay, I can take my coming out stuff and I can start to overlay it and help people start to step into, doesn't matter if you're coming out as gay or lesbian, or you're coming out of a bad relationship, or you're coming out of corporate America wanting to be an entrepreneur. The whole point of this is I help you be confident, be unique, and be yourself. And that's when the light bulb started really going off all around me, that let's focus on a message of coming out to be fully self-expressed, be yourself, and have the confidence to do that. But it didn't come from me going, let's find the next thing. It came from me having to take a step back. And quite honestly, I have to be really honest about this. It was in a moment that I was about to give up my business, because I'm like, you know what, this is too much struggle. This is too hard. I'm trying, and I'm giving people great prices, and I'm jumping at anything that comes along. But the moment I said, let me just be of service, tell me how I can do this, is when everything began to shift.
Could I have a question, Rick?
Yeah.
Could you give, that's a pretty long, it's a decent amount of time over this journey. How long ago did you come to this realization? How long did it take you to reach that point?
It was about 3 years of doing lots of different things before I landed on it. And so I finished the program in 2010. In 2013 is when I really had that conversation. And in 2013 is when a lot of things really started happening for me.
Okay.
It was because I suddenly saw how I could be different things, but have one consistent message of how I serve, who I serve. And one of the things that happened was, and a good friend of mine by the name of Dory Clark, which some of you may know, she's an author and she does a lot of political stuff and stuff. But she said to me, she goes, go deep and then go wide. And I thought, that makes a lot of sense. I can go deep teaching people how to step out of this closet of not being who they are. I can give them all the insights of how you just go into that closet and you open up to your truth and you find pathways to living who you are and doing what you would do if you weren't afraid of disappointing anyone. so I kept going deeper and deeper and going, what is this journey all about? How do I help people come out? How do I help people be authentic? How do I help them build confidence? I just kept going deeper, knowing that the deeper was I'm doing this with people in the closet who are trying to come to their sexual truth as people who've been married. But then as I started to go wider, it's like, okay, then I'm going to help gay men do this who are in midlife who have still not come to that space of being fully self-expressed. As I started doing it with gay men, then I started finding other people who are like, gay men were referring friends to me saying, hey, I have a friend of mine who's in this business and, she's doing this or he's doing that. And they weren't gay or lesbian people. And suddenly what I found was there's a lot of people striving through these journeys of trying to be authentically who they are. And every one of us struggles. Every one of us hides something in our closets. And it suddenly just began to be the thing that opened up. Simultaneously, opportunities started showing up that, again, if somebody told me I would have been doing a radio show or a podcast 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have said, not going to be happening. Mm-hmm. But in 2013, I had the opportunity to start do a radio show. And then that eventually now has become my podcast. More writing opportunities opened up. And in 2013 is when I started the journey of writing my own book. So that was a pretty pivotal year for me. 2013, early 2014 is when everything began to shift.
Yeah, and it's really interesting and good for fellow coaches to note that it doesn't happen overnight, and it does, and it's an evolution, and who knows how you'll evolve, in the next few years.
Right.
So it really is a journey for us as well. So this is wonderful information for you to share with us.
Well, I think it is really critical, Claire, to understand there will be people who it will happen for overnight. Mm-hmm. But as it happens overnight, it didn't really happen overnight. In fact, Bruce Schneider, the president of IPEC, he saw some stuff I posted when we just celebrated the 100th episode of my podcast back in early September. Oh. And I had posted that, and he sent me a message, and he said, I'm so glad you stuck with your niche. And I remember, and it was actually when you and I were at that ELI session, Claire, mm-hmm. that he pulled me aside and he goes, I want to say, first of all, how proud I am to have you as an IPEC coach and to see the work that you're doing. Mm-hmm. And he says, and I also want you to know that your journey as a coach is probably going to be a lot harder than other coaches, simply because of the people you're going to serve. And building your business is probably going to be more of a challenge because of the people you serve. Because they're going to be their energy is going to be very catabolic, it's going to be very negative, and they're going to probably be very skeptical. And that was some of the best advice I ever got from anybody as a mentor. And of course, immediately I kind of like, well, great, I don't have time for this. I want it to happen overnight. Mm-hmm. But now that I've been doing this, and now that I'm getting the opportunities I'm getting, I wouldn't have changed any of it, quite honestly, because through the journey is how I've learned to show up to be how I want to be in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's offered me the opportunities to get to do the things that I get to do.
Yeah, exciting.
So one of the things that Joe and I talked about is how I've started to take what I've done and make it really creative. Before I, find some creative ways to build my business, but before I hop over there, I just want to see if, by chance, I don't see any questions in the chat, but I want to see if there's any questions anybody has who's listening.
Okay.
And it doesn't look like.
Fabian, Mirna, any questions?
Okay, so let's kind of jump in. So some of the stuff that I found, a lot of coaches are always like, well, how do I begin to leverage my business? How do I move forward? I think a lot of it is, number one, and this is going to sound kind of flippant probably when I say it, it's just show up. Every day, show up to being a coach. Now, I can be honest with you guys that right now, coaching is about less than 15% of my business, because I've taken and I have expanded into things that I know are what I really am put here on this earth to do. My podcast, speaking on stages, doing workshops, those are the things that really align with who I am. I would love to write. So if you were to see my top 3 things that I do in my business, it's speaking, it's podcasting, and it's writing. The last two things are coaching and workshops. Those are the last two things that really show up. Those probably between those two right now, they make up about 20% to 25% of my business. Most of my business comes from, at this point, speaking number one, podcasting number two. Now, when I say podcasting, I know there'd probably be a question of, well, how do you make money on the podcast? I don't have sponsors. I do not sell anything on the podcast per se. I mean, there's definitely stuff on the show pages. When somebody lands on a show page, you'll see that there's ways to do some coaching with me. There's ways to buy my book. There's ways to do some of the courses. But to be one of those podcasts that's got sponsors and pushing, that's not how I monetize. However, my podcast monetizes for me through speaking gigs and through people who listen to the podcast, follow through, and then want to do one-on-one coaching with me. So what I mean by showing up is keep showing up to why you became a coach, but be open to what else you're supposed to be doing. Like I said, if I'd known that somebody thought I was going to be doing radio or podcasting, it would have been like, no way. But I remember the first day I got behind the microphone and I was solo because I had bought somebody else's show. We had completely re-engineered it. We completely rebranded it. And that's when it became the Coming Out Lounge. And so in podcast world, radio world, when you launch a show, pretty much you do what's called a zero show, where you talk about what this show is going to be about, the kind of things we're going to talk about, who you are, why should people listen to you. And I remember getting behind that microphone and telling my story and telling why I was committed to doing this and why I was committed to showing up each and every week to be a part of people's lives and to guide them through finding themselves and coming to their truth as gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. And I remember getting off that microphone that first time and just feeling completely at peace and very, very excited because I'd found something that I enjoyed doing, that I felt very comfortable doing, that gave me a thrill, and that I actually knew internally, I'm pretty good at this. I could have walked away from that. 26 weeks later, I could have walked away when they came back to me and said, we want to renew the contract. This was going to cost you because it was an internet radio show. So I was paying for this. I was using it as a marketing mechanism. And I did walk away. I said, I'm not doing this. I'm not paying this kind of money. But when I walked away, I felt very empty. And I felt empty for about a year. Now, in that year's time was when I was exploring, how do I take this bigger message of everybody's got closets, everybody's coming out of something, everybody has a right to be confident, to be unique, to be themselves, everybody has a right to be fully self-expressed. For a year, we worked on this. And when I say we, I had a team. I had a marketing person, I had some branding people, I had some business coaches, I had some strategy people. I invested a lot of money in trying to figure out, okay, how does this look when we pivot? Because it was a pivot. It wasn't, we're not going completely off course, but we're going to pivot to a bigger audience. It was a big switch for me. But in that year is when I started realizing, here's the things I really love. I love to speak, I love to podcast, and I love to write. And that was the year that my book got finished. That was the year the universe delivered to me one of the biggest podcast names in the world, who became a mentor. That was the year that I started realizing I really need to be speaking. And in that year, I spoke a little over 45 times at different colleges and universities. And that was the year I said, this is what I meant to be doing. Those three things. Simultaneously, I was getting coaching clients. I was getting coaching clients that actually aligned with the bigger message of, I want to be me. I want to be doing what I'm meant to do in the world. I want to be more self-expressed. Gone was the fear of, how am I going to transition from being the coming out coach working with LGBTQ people to being the coming out coach that works with people who are coming out to try to be more self-expressed. And it was such an interesting journey, because the more I said, but I want to be working with other people and not just LGBTQ people, the more people started showing up, because my message was getting clearer. I was able to talk about it. And now I talk about it really, I believe, really succinctly. What I do is I work with people to build their confidence, to own their uniqueness in the world, and to be uniquely who they are, to be themselves, to be fully self-expressed. A lot of people get that. I can go do this talk in front of a group of high school students. Next week, I'm speaking in front of 2,500 high school students on their college preparedness day. The following week, I'm speaking in front of 300 entrepreneurs about coming out to be an entrepreneur and own who you are as an entrepreneur. So these are the moments I think as coaches, sometimes we get our blinders on and we think, I'm just here to coach. But be open to, in that coaching thing, what are people telling you you're really good at? What are you showing up to that you keep finding yourself maybe in the same places? Maybe you find yourself showing up at a lot of the events where you go, oh, I could speak like that person. Or maybe you find yourself going, wow, I listen to all these podcasts. I'd like to be doing that. Yes, you're going to have the fears. How do I do that? Well, then go find the people who can help you learn how to do that. I've had, again, Michael Port was one of my speaking mentors for a couple of years. I have a new one, Grant Baldwin, who's helping me build my speaking business. John Lee Dumas has helped me build my podcasting business. I've got another guy who's taking me to the next level on my podcast. But I'm investing and I'm doing those things that make me most happy. And I'm still coaching. In fact, just before we got on this call, I was coaching a client. So I think it's about finding the things that turn you on, that light you up, and not walking away from them.
Great. Well, we do have a question. And Fabian asks, what might be some lessons learned you can offer regarding when to hire a mentor, how to find the right one, and how much to invest?
Okay. So when to find one is when you keep coming up against the wall where you're like, I can't figure this out. By the time you knocked your head against the wall a few times, that's when it's time to go find a mentor. That's when you get the signal of you can't do it alone. And the thing is none of us can do this alone. I think it's the hardest thing for us as coaches, especially when we're first starting out. And for most of us, when the money's tight, is to go, okay, I probably need some help, but I'm going to try to figure out how to do this. So I think by the time you pounded your hand against the wall the second or third time, that's when it's time to go find a mentor. The second thing I would recommend with finding a mentor is find one who is aligned in the same way that you are with your values. If you get a mentor who values don't align with you, it's not going to work. Now, that doesn't mean go find a mentor that's just like you. What I'm getting at is make sure their value system is pretty much like yours, but also make sure that that mentor is going to be able to bring to you the thing that you need most. That doesn't necessarily mean that mentor is going to sit down and do the work for you. Michael Port was a big mentor of mine, not only in my business, but in my speaking career. But what he brought to me was, here's a format. Here's a blueprint. Here's how it could work. Stylistically and values-wise, we were pretty well aligned, but on some fronts we weren't. Wherever we weren't aligned is where I realized that was my opportunity to do things the way that I want to do them. That's most in alignment with my business. But I took in the blueprints and the advice and the things that I thought really, really fit for where I was going as a coach, as a speaker, as a person, and that really helped. But to find the right one, make sure at least part of the criteria is that value-wise they are aligned with you. How much to invest is a really tough question to answer. I can tell you that over the years, and I'm going to just focus on the years that once I decided I was going to be a podcaster, a speaker, and a writer. I would say over the last 3 years, I have probably invested close to $20,000 in different programs. And I'm not just talking, handing people, I'm talking travel to conferences and everything. It's probably been a little over $20,000 to have Michael Port do the speaking, the Book Yourself Solid, John Lee Dumas, the programs of being in Podcaster's Paradise, the investments in having a podcast crew, all those different things add up. But I would say in the last 3 years, it's been pretty close to 20 grand.
Okay.
But each one of those things contributed to my bottom line as well.
Mm-hmm.
Even now as we speak. So I'll give you a really good example. My podcast company, hosting company, that hosts my entire website, they gave me the entire template. It's called Podcast Websites. Great product if you're considering doing podcasting, is everything is built in. You don't have to go get anything. It's all there for you. Mark, who is the president of the company, he's doing a mastermind program starting in November for the next 8 weeks. Part of the crew that's going to be involved in that are brand new podcasters. Part of the other crew are those of us who've been podcasting for 18 to 24 months, and we're ready to leverage our podcast to new heights. So I'm investing money with him, and it's an 8-week program, and it's going to be $1,000 to be in that program. So it's about finding what you want to do. I know the $1,000 that I'm going to invest in that program with the frequency that I'm podcasting right now and the kind of guests that I'm getting on my podcast, that money's going to come back to me easily within 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
So I hope that answers the question from Fabian.
Yeah, and one thing that struck me, you're using the word mentor, and does that differ to you from a coach?
For me, a mentor is somebody who has been there and done what you're attempting to do. Okay. So when I look at a mentor, if I'm looking for podcasts, it's going to be someone who's been podcasting. If I'm speaking, it's going to be someone who's been speaking.
Okay.
Now, they may be one and the same. They may be a coach and they may be doing that. Both. Grant Baldwin is a coach, even though he doesn't do one-on-one. He does a lot of group stuff, but he's also been a speaker. He's created $1.5 million in speaking revenue in the last 2 years. Started out as basically he was a youth minister, did a lot of speaking in the faith-based communities, high school, college, and then now he's speaking at a lot of entrepreneurial events. So, to me, sometimes the mentor is, I guess to me the difference is a mentor is very specific and has done what you're attempting to do, whereas a coach may not. Mm-hmm. However, a lot of times they're one and the same. Right. Michael Port was my speaking coach, but he's also somebody who's built businesses. So in that realm, he's done both those things. And I think that, for me, that's the difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Fabian says, thank you, great advice. And he's also a podcaster. He
awesome.
uses Paradise.
Yeah, we're both in the same then. So I'll have to look you up, Fabian. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one. Now I'm blanking at. It was about for your speaking gigs. Mm-hmm. It's originally I was like, well, what are you speaking about? And it sounds like you do, if you're speaking to entrepreneurs, you customize your message. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you decide what you're going to speak to various groups about?
Sure. So here's kind of one of the interesting little secrets in the speaking community. Most speakers typically have 1 to 3 speaking topics they talk to. Uh-huh. In fact, most of us only have 1 to 3 speeches. And what we do is we literally just take the speech and we have our core. So I can tell you my core speech is about being curious, courageous, confident, and committed. Those 4 things I can take and I can overlay the coming out journey that I've been through. I can overlay it into a high school audience that I'm doing next week, but the 4 core things are going to be there. The following week when I speak in front of the entrepreneurs, it's going to be the same thing. The coming out journey, regardless of what you're coming out of, is pretty much the same for everybody. If you're coming out of a relationship, you're going to have people that are saying, you're crazy, why are you leaving that relationship? Are you serious you want to do this? You're going to be left alone. All these things are the same things that happen when somebody says, I'm coming out to say I'm gay or lesbian. Are you sure? How do you know? If you do this, people are not going to like you. You're going to be left alone. So what I've learned to do is I've taken the different stages of the coming out process and I just overlay it into each speech. Now, if I'm speaking in front of a gay and lesbian audience, it's going to take a slightly different tweak because I know they're going to really relate to some of the things I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to be able to talk about, hooking up and things like that. But what's interesting is, and I'll give you like just a couple of lines of the speech for the entrepreneurs. It's really interesting to me that so many of you entrepreneurs are really curious about running your own businesses. In fact, most of you keep hooking up with the thought, just like a gay or lesbian person may go hook up with someone, just like any of us go hook up with someone when we're starting that dating thing. In fact, you as entrepreneurs are dating the idea of becoming an entrepreneur, and you keep hooking up with it. But when are you going to take action to really come out and say this is who you are?
Okay.
So you see how I take this concept and go, okay, how can I talk to this in this audience? So now let me take it to the high school level. So a lot of you high school kids, you're playing around. You're kind of like dating the concept of, hey, I think I'm going to go to college, or maybe I'll join the military, or maybe I'll convince mom and dad that maybe I just want to do something else. But you just keep dating that idea. You haven't learned to take a stand. You're curious, which is great, but I want you to go dive and be more curious in that. So you see how I smoothed it out? I won't bring up as much of the sexual innuendo with the college or high school kids. I find ways to take the same thing, but it's still the concept of being curious, figuring out why you're doing it, you're playing with the idea, and you're moving on.
Right, and it sounds like because you've done it so often and adjusted your talk, that it takes probably pretty minimal preparation time.
Right. Yeah.
And it's one of the issues that I grapple with. So when people ask me to speak, I'm like, well, wait a minute, I have to create the speech. So
the key is if you get a really solid speech,
mm-hmm.
and I can give a little insight to this. So my speech is very simple. Whatever the C is, so let's just I'll just even it's laying right here for the college kids. So the commitment is be committed about letting go of your fears and do what you're meant to do here on the earth. So I make one statement. Then I give examples of what that would look like. Then I tell them why it's important to do that. And then I just come back and I reinstate the obvious. As a speaker, I know when I do those 4 steps, and there's actually a story. So it's state the obvious, give an example, tell them why this is important, tell the story, and restate the obvious. By the time I do those 5 steps, that's 5 minutes of my speech. I have 4 C's, 5 minutes of each of those 4 C's, that's 20 minutes. I have an opening story, that's 5 minutes. I have a activity that I do in the middle of it, that's 5 minutes. By the time I'm all done, I have a 45-minute speech. And that's my formula.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes really interesting when you start to, formalize these things, and okay, I'm always going to open with this when it's about commitment. I'm going to tell this story. I'm going to give these examples. Now, the interesting piece where you start to customize, Claire, is when you bring in the examples. So in the high school examples, when I'm talking about curiosity, it's like, so do you remember how curious you were that very first time, you looked at that other person and you thought, I wonder what it'd be like to have a kiss? Or do you remember that very first time how curious you were? What's it going to be like to be a freshman walking around on campus here? Or maybe you got really, really curious about what is it going to be like that first time I get to go to homecoming? Boom, boom, boom. I just did 3 things that every one of those kids is going to relate to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I'm doing the entrepreneur, I will pick 3 other things. But it's what I call, I have things in my drawer. I have stories, I have examples, and I'm the kind of speaker that I'm always looking around. I'm watching stuff. So like last night, my husband and I went to see The Girl on the Train, and I'd already read the book, but I found it really fascinating to see, how they changed the storyline. And so now I'm going to use that thing in a speech. We all create stories. In fact, next week I'm going to talk about this with the high school kids. We do a thing where we talk about creating stories and living by our stories. I said, but here's what's interesting. I was watching the movie Girl on the Train last weekend with my husband. And what I found so interesting is when you read the book, the story is based in London. When you see the movie, the story is based in New York. But what I also found interesting, and so I go into a little bit, it's finding the things that are relevant and in the moment that you can bring into that, and you drop it in, and then you step away from it and you move on, but you go back to your core story.
Mm-hmm. So staying current is, yeah, and it's interesting too that you're able to insert yourself in the lives of a high schooler.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a skill as well, to be able to think, to put yourself in that place is very, that's.
Well, the other thing that I've discovered, and this has only been over the last couple of months, which should have been so obvious to me. So I started speaking at colleges and universities probably about three or 4 years ago. And I speak on a speakers bureau for PFLAG, which is Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And because of being my own boss, I can speak whenever I want to. I'm one of those speakers that's pretty freely available.
Mm-hmm.
And what should have been really obvious to me just suddenly became obvious in the last 3 months. I want to speak at colleges and universities and high schools because I have this affinity with the kids. And this came to me because I went to a couple of conferences this summer where I was surrounded by a lot of millennials. And I'd been to these same conferences in the years past, but this year was so interesting because I realized the connection that I really had with these younger people. And I'm like, well, if this is the connection I have, maybe this is who I'm supposed to be speaking to. I thought I was supposed to be going out and speaking in the corporate world and, going in, and I still think there's a space for that. But what I'm realizing now is these are my kids. These are my people. This is where I can have fun. This is where I can be silly. And not that I can't do it in the corporate world, but this is where I feel so at home. And it's also where I feel the resonating energy coming back. So why not go do, again, it's kind of like I already said, do the thing that's most aligned with who you are, that is in alignment with your core, and that makes running your business easy. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to get gigs. There's work to it. And I'm lucky I have a team that works on that. Mm-hmm. But knowing who I specifically want to talk to, as soon as I came back to my team and said, okay, we're going to keep the corporate stuff up there. We're going to keep some of this entrepreneurial stuff up there. But here's where we're focusing. I want to go speak at colleges and universities. I want to speak to their LGBT communities about coming out and being who you are in college. I want to do the uniqueness talk that covers everybody in college about being uniquely who they are and becoming fully self-expressed. And I want to do the confidence, kick-ass confidence talk. Those are the 3 talks. Go get them. That's how I want to show up on college campuses. And as soon as we got really focused, that's why now I probably got 6 proposals out on the table right now. Mm-hmm. And I know that at least 3 of those are going to come through in the next 2 weeks.
Can I ask you a kind of a devil's advocate question? One
Sure.
of the things, and you talked about it at the beginning, that you struggled with the cash flow.
Yep.
And I thought that was very interesting, a very interesting observation that that the people who needed you couldn't really pay you because of their shared finances with their family, etc. So with, and the wisdom is, well, go for corporate gigs because they have money and they can pay you. How do you reconcile that with focusing on students who may not have cash readily available?
So in the college and university market, it's not about the students so much. It's about serving the campus. It's about serving the student activities, groups. It's about showing up at the Greek organizations. It's about being of service to the campus as a whole.
Okay.
So that's what I'm doing. Now, could I make a lot more money in corporate? Sure. But when you have the opportunity, so my speaking fee, my minimal speaking fee is $2,500. I'm not having any trouble getting those gigs.
Awesome. Okay. I see.
Now, when you go up the ladder, there's options, and it's all about learning how to work this. Actually, my middle tier speaking gig is the one that I'm getting most traction from right now, which is $4,500. But what that includes is me showing up to do 3 talks in one day One is a keynote, and then when I say 3 talks, the other 2 may be taking 100 students or 50 students and going and doing a kick-ass confidence workshop. The other one may be, let's go over here and let's just have a small meetup around how do you own your uniqueness in the world. They're not necessarily have to be structured stuff, but that's how I package that. In addition to that, the student or the college gets either 100 copies of my book, or they get 100 t-shirts of the core talk I do is called Make Your Cork Work. So they get these t-shirts. They can use those t-shirts however they want. They can use the books however they want. This is where you get really creative. How I pitch that is, here's the deal. I'm willing to come to your campus and do 3 talks. And those 3 talks will also include, you get 100 of my books or 100 t-shirts, which you can use to sell. The value is the t-shirts and the book are worth X. You're getting them included. So you guys can sell those t-shirts or the books for 20 bucks a pop, and it helps cover the cost of bringing me onto your campus. I immediately just help them figure out, oh, here's how I can afford to do this.
Awesome. Okay, great. Yeah, that's some great ideas about how to just to market what you have. Let me see. Do we have any other? Because we're getting near to the 2 o'clock time frame. And encourage anyone out there, if you have questions. I see operations, and Dorothy says, great information on mentoring and also seeing a little on investing financially in yourself.
Yeah.
Which is
the hardest thing I think sometimes for us is to invest in ourselves or in our business. And I used to fight it. Trust me, I used to fight it. And I know we've all heard it, but some of the best investments you can make is investing in somebody to do the stuff that you shouldn't be doing. Right now, I have a podcast producer that I actually have 2. I have a producer who gets me guests, and then I have a production producer who edits everything and takes care of everything for me. Mm-hmm. It's the best money I invest because I show up, just like I did today. I show up, I do my podcast, and then I turn the button off and I send him all the files, and he takes care of everything else. That takes out of my life about 4 to 6 hours of work a week. Okay. It's worth every bit of it. Every bit of it.
And you mentioned one thing, and maybe I missed it. Do you transcribe all of your podcasts and maybe put those together as a book or something?
No, I don't do any transcription. Some podcasts do, I don't. I strictly just do the podcast. However, I try to pretty succinctly write a blog post each week that coincides with the podcast. Today I'm writing blog posts around the Coming Out Lounge, or the National Coming Out Day. That will, one of them should be up by the time we're done doing this. I'm waiting to see if they approved it, but it'll be up on Huffington Post, and then others will show up on my blog. So the other thing I'd love to just throw at everybody, Claire, that I think are the 2 other big takeaways I'd love to just leave with people, and they're really short.
Awesome.
Define success for yourself, but allow it to be fluid. We all tend to go, okay, I know I'm going to have success when, but don't be tied to that outcome so much. Have it as a goal, keep it in mind, but allow it to be fluid. If I hadn't been fluid to become a podcaster and a speaker and a writer, I don't know that I'd be in business, because I was getting to the point where I didn't enjoy just coaching people. I didn't want to just be coaching people. And had I not been fluid to go, okay, well, success looks like this. Success didn't have to just look like having, and at that time, success for me was having 20 clients on average and having X number of dollars generating from those 20 clients. That was my first benchmark. But when I started to shift and go, okay, success could also look like this, that's when I started to bring more joy back into my life. And the other thing that is a Teddy Roosevelt quote that's one of my favorites, I bring it up almost every time I speak on stage or in venues like this, is to remember that comparison is the killer of joy. Every time you compare yourself to someone else, you just killed the joy in what you're trying to do.
That's awesome. Okay. And anybody else want to comment? I really enjoyed your great idea on providing a combination of services. Nellie says, thank you so much. And great takeaways, Rick, on how to really put your business together and to look at it in different ways. I took lots of notes, and I thoroughly enjoyed hearing from you and hearing about your journey.
No, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to always be a part of any time I can spend time with fellow coaches, whether they're live here or they listen to this later. It's been a blessing to be part of your team and your group, and hope everyone in South Florida is doing well given what you've been through over the last few days.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll leave with our ending code. Let me stop the recording. And thanks again, Rick. I'll stop.